Hello everyone, this is Haritra. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So we are continuing the Python for Data Science series, and this is episode 3, where we will cover these are the topics which we will cover, like function, then call by reference, the scope of variables, lambda function, and how we can combine lambda functions with this map and filter function. So these are basically the uses of map and filter function. To start with, first we will see what a function is in Python. So previously in last few videos, you might have seen that I have been using this print and len, right? So these are already defined functions within Python, which we are already using whenever we are trying to print or we are trying to check what is the length of a list, right? So these two functions we have been using so far. So you can also create a function by with your own definition. So that definition, you need to define it. So how to define that is you start with a def keyword, then the name of the function, then this first brackets, and then you define a colon. So within this first brackets, you can pass arguments to the function. So that is kind of optional. So you can send arguments to the function, or you can also ignore that. So, so Python in Python, like every function should have a specific job to do. So generally, we write functions to do some repetitive task. Like we write the function once and we call it multiple times to do different type of operations within our programming uh, program, right? So yeah, after that you can see I have this is a function which will just print hello world, right? Then the function ends with a return keyword. So this return keyword is optional one. You can write a return or you can also ignore that, right? So and also you can return value or you also can leave it as blank. So with that, the function will end and it is kind of a exit statement which marks the end of the Python function, right? So let's run this. So if you run a function, right, if you only run a defined function, it will not do anything. So you need to call that function. So you need to call that function by the name with which you have defined the function. Once you call that function with this parenthesis, then the output will come from that function, right? So here the output is print. It will print only hello world. So that output you can see here, right? Then this is example where the function accepts two arguments, right? So the arguments are a and b. So once it accepts the arguments, then it does some kind of operation. So here I am just doing a sum of these two arguments, and I am storing into a variable which is this one. Then I am returning that sum. So this function is nothing but it's taking two arguments and it's doing the sum and it's returning the value, right? So once I run it, then I am calling this function with these two arguments, right? 10 and 20. So I am asking my Python function to do the sum of 10 and 20 and then give me the result, right? So the result is getting returned from this function, which is 30. So these are the ways, the very basics way which you can define a function and how you can pass arguments and uh, how we can, after passing the arguments, how we can get back the value from that function and how we can print that. So this is the way to do it. Now in Python, we generally do call by reference, which means that we can change any value inside the function and it will reflect in the calling function, right? So for an example, I have defined a function which I have named as alter list. Then I am accepting the argument, which is kind of a list. And at first, I'm printing the value of that list as it is. Then I'm making changes on that list. Right? So I'm altering the first element, or you could say the second element on that list to 3. Right? Then again, I'm printing the value to show you that how the value, whether the value is getting changed or not. Then I'm returning that altered list to the calling function, right? So once I define this function, now let's call it. So at first I will create a list. So that list will be of 3 integers. Then I'm calling my alter list function with this list, right? Now let's run it. So the idea is to see the outputs from this two print statement and also after this once I call this function, then I will check what is the value in my my list, whether the my list contains the value of 10, 20, or 30, or the value has also got changed. Okay, let's see. Okay, so when I first run the function, so the first, before changing the value of the list, the output is this 10, 20, or 30. Then I make this change, right? So after the change, the value is 10, 20, 10, 20 or 30, it is not the value. The value got changed from 20 to 3 here, right? So you can see that. And this is the output which I am printing here, right? Which is after doing the function call. So here you can see that value is also getting changed in my list, right? So here the value is also reflecting as 3. So that's why we call it. So this is the way how the function works in Python. Like it works with call by reference. So it's also changed where the value is also getting changed and it is getting reflected in the calling function. Now, few other concepts which you should be mindful of. Now, the concept of local and global variables, right? So the variables which are defined within the function, right? Say for this variable, right? List arg. So if you the scope of this variable is only within inside this function. So if you try to access this variable outside the function, it will throw you an error because the scope is only within the function, right? So this type of variables we call local variables. So this list arg, if I try to access outside this function, so it will give me an error, right? It will give me an error saying that list arg is not defined. So the scope of this list arg is only within this alter list function. And if you try to access this outside the function, it will give you an error. Now the my list is kind of a global variable which I have defined outside the function. So it can be accessed anywhere within the program. Right? So this is a global variable which is my list. Right? Now within the function you can also define a global variable. So how to do that is you write global before you have to define that variable with this keyword of global. So here I am writing global x and I am assigning a string value to this variable. This is a global variable, is the string which I am assigning. So let's run it. And before accessing that x, right, or the global variable, you have to first run that. You have to call that function first. So here I am calling my function, and then I am accessing this x variable, right? So it will give you the exact value of this variable which was defined inside the function because I have changed the scope of this variable to a global scope instead of a local scope, right? So we are getting the exact value which has been defined inside the function. So that these things you need to be mindful of. What is the scope of a variable? If you define it within the function, that should be a local. If you want to make that variable a global, so you need to use this global keyword. Right? So this type of concept you need to be mindful of. Now there are two. Now there are another concept which is a lambda function, right? So lambda function in Python is nothing but an anonymous function, so which is kind of defined within one line, and it does not have a return type, and also we don't use the def keyword when defining a lambda function. So as this lambda function does not have any name, so we call it as an anonymous function, right? So the syntax for lambda function is like this: you write lambda, then the arguments which for which you are defining that function, and then the expression. The expression is like the operation you want to do on those arguments. Right? So for an example, like if you want to square a variable, right, and you want to create a function out of it to do the square, this is the way to do it. Now this takes a lot of space. Right? You have to write 4 lines to do this operation if you are doing it using a user defined function. Now you can simply call it, you can simply use lambda function to create the similar function in only one line, right? So this is my argument and this is my expression, right? And I also started the this line with lambda, and then I am assigning that to my f. And now if I call this, it will do the same operation. It will square the variable, but with lesser number of lines and more compact way. So this is the way to define a lambda function. So we generally use in data science work lambda functions very frequently, which kind of does a inline operation, or on a single line it does the operation and it gives you the value. Okay. Now lambda function also can accept multiple arguments. So you can see here two arguments are given. So I'm just doing a multiplication operation. So this is the expression of my lambda function. And similarly, you can call this function. So if you check the type of this function, so it is a function itself. So lambda function is also a class of function. And this is how you pass the multiple arguments to this function. Right? Okay, now let's talk about few uses of lambda functions, like how we can combine lambda functions to few other functions which are like map and filter, and how we can do certain operations on top of that, right? So this is the two lists which I have created, like x and y, and those have equal number of elements in that each of this list, right? So three are number of elements in x and y. Now I want to do a element wise sum, right? So like one will be summed with 4, 2 will be summed with 5, and 3 will be summed with 6, right? So that will the map function, which along with lambda function, will enable you to do that, right? Now the syntax of map function is you write map, then the function, and then the data, right? So this function which I am writing here, that can also be a lambda function also, right? So here I am just defining an anonymous function which will take two arguments and it will do the sum, and it will return the value. And this is the data which I am passing to this map function, right? So if you run this, it will not give you any output because we need to incorporate this output within a list. So the output of map function you need to convert to a list to get the output. So let's run it. So this is the output from the first print statement, right? So here I'm not using any list. So you can see that only a map object is returned. Now when I convert it to a list, then only I'm getting the proper output. So this is the basic functionality of lambda along with map. Then there would be certain scenarios where you will come across when you need to filter the data, right? So to filter the data, you can use this filter function along with lambda function, right? So this would be evaluating expression which we will write here. So it will do the evaluation here. So I'm giving a condition that it will only give you the values which are greater than 10, right? So I am passing this data, which is kind of a list. So I want the output of my list when the values are only greater than 10, right? So this is the expression which I am writing here. And this is the data which I am passing to my filter function. Once I run it, it will filter out the values which are less than 10, and it will only give you the values which are greater than 10, right? So these are the very basic uses of lambda function along with map and filter, which we generally use when we try to do the data preparation part in data science, right? So this type of things which you can try it out. So we started with functions, then we see what is a call by reference, then we discussed what is the scope of variables, then how we can define a variable which is a global in nature inside a function that I have also talked about. Then we have seen what is a lambda function and how we can combine map and filter with uh, lambda function, right? So this is all that I have for this video. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching this video. So if you like this video, if it is useful to you, please subscribe this channel and share with your circle. Thank you.